The flashing red and blue lights in my driveway at 6:30 in the morning on a Saturday were not how I planned to start my weekend, especially after spending the entire previous evening reviewing zoning proposals for the town council meeting on Monday. I stood there in my thermal pajama pants and a heavy fleece jacket, watching Officer Martinez step out of his patrol car with that uncomfortable look cops get when they know the call is complete nonsense, but they still have to respond. "Morning, Carter," he said, using my first name because we had gone to the same high school and served on the volunteer fire department together for 3 years. "Got a complaint about an illegal vehicle on the property." I gestured toward my brand new Ski-Doo snowmobile sitting perfectly legally in my own driveway. "You mean my Snowmachine, the one I bought yesterday and parked in my own driveway?" Before Martinez could respond, I heard the sharp click of heels on pavement and turned to see Deborah Wellington marching across the street from her house, wearing a powder blue pantsuit despite the fact that it was barely above freezing and most sane people were still in bed. She was the president of the Pinewood Estates Homeowners Association, a position she had held with an iron fist for the past 4 years, and she carried a leather-bound copy of the HOA bylaws like it was holy scripture. "Officer, thank you for responding so quickly," Deborah said, completely ignoring me as if I was not standing right there. "As I explained on the phone, that monstrosity is in direct violation of our community standards. Section 12, Paragraph 4 clearly states that recreational vehicles must be stored out of sight in garages or approved storage facilities." Martinez looked from her to me and back again. "Mrs. Wellington, this is Mr. Lawson's private property, and the snowmobile appears to be legally registered based on the temporary tags. The HOA bylaws supersede personal preference," Deborah snapped. "Every homeowner signed an agreement when they purchased their property. Rules are rules." I had been living in Pinewood Estates for 8 months now, having moved to Fairbanks, Alaska, after accepting the position as town council president. The job was demanding but rewarding, and I had specifically chosen this neighborhood because it was quiet and close to the wilderness trails I loved. What I had not anticipated was Deborah Wellington and her obsessive enforcement of every minor HOA regulation imaginable. "Deborah," I said, keeping my voice level, "my garage is full of boxes I have not finished unpacking yet. The Snowmachine will be in there by tomorrow evening. It has been sitting in my driveway for less than 24 hours. The bylaws do not provide exceptions for inconvenience," she replied, her lips pressed into a thin line. "If I allow you to violate the rules, then everyone will want special treatment. That is how neighborhoods fall into disrepair and property values plummet." Martinez shifted his weight, clearly wanting to be anywhere else. "Mrs. Wellington, I cannot issue a citation for something that is not actually illegal. This is a civil matter between you and the HOA." "Then you are refusing to do your job." Deborah's voice rose an octave. "I pay taxes in this town, and I expect the police department to enforce the law." "There is no law being broken here," Martinez said more firmly. "I would suggest you work this out through your HOA channels." Deborah turned to me, her eyes narrowed. "You will receive a formal notice of violation by Monday morning, along with a fine of $100 for each day the vehicle remains visible. I suggest you make space in that garage immediately." She spun on her heel and marched back across the street, leaving Martinez and me standing in the cold morning air. He let out a long breath that formed a cloud in front of his face. "Sorry about that, Carter. She calls us at least twice a week about something. Last month it was because the Patterson kid was skateboarding on the sidewalk. Before that, She reported the Johnsons for having their trash cans visible from the street on a non-collection day. Sounds like she has too much free time, I muttered. You have no idea. Chief Ramos is about ready to tell her that we will not respond to any more calls from this neighborhood unless there is an actual emergency. Martinez headed back to his car, then paused. Hey, congratulations on the council position, by the way. My wife voted for you. We are really hoping you can do something about the traffic situation on Airport Way. Working on it, I assured him. Should have some proposals ready by next month. After Martinez left, I went back inside and made a strong pot of coffee, trying to let go of my irritation. I had dealt with difficult people before in my role on the town council, but something about Deborah's attitude really got under my skin. The way she had called the police over something so trivial, wasting their time and resources on a personal vendetta, struck me as beyond unreasonable. My phone rang around 9 and I saw my neighbor Paul Henderson's name on the screen. Saw the cops at your place this morning, Paul said without preamble. Let me guess, Deborah, how did you know? Because she has done it to half the neighborhood. She called animal control on the Mitchells because their cat was sitting in their own front window, and she claimed it was intimidating her. She reported the Chens to the fire marshal because they had a small propane grill on their back patio. The woman is absolutely out of control. I leaned against my kitchen counter, sipping my coffee. There has to be something people can do. Can you not vote her out? We have tried. She has a couple of cronies on the HOA board who always vote with her, and not enough people show up to the meetings to make a difference. Most folks just pay the fines and try to stay off her radar. It is easier than fighting. That attitude bothered me more than I wanted to admit. I had not gotten into public service to see bullies run roughshod over reasonable people. Well, I am not paying a fine for parking my own property on my own land, Paul laughed, but it was not a happy sound. Good luck with that. She put a lien on the Richardsons' house last year over $800 in unpaid fines. They had to sell and move. After we hung up, I spent the next hour researching Alaska HOA law and the specific bylaws for Pinewood Estates. What I found was both enlightening and infuriating. While HOAs did have legal authority to enforce certain rules, there were also significant limitations on their power. More importantly, the bylaws had to be enforced fairly and consistently across all properties, and they could not contradict state or local ordinances. I pulled up the Pinewood Estates bylaws document and started reading through it carefully, making notes as I went. Section 12. Paragraph 4 did indeed state that recreational vehicles should be stored out of sight, but the wording was vague. It said should, not must, which in legal terms made it a recommendation rather than a requirement. Furthermore, the definition of recreational vehicle was ambiguous enough that it could potentially be challenged. More interesting was what I found when I started looking at the HOA financial records, which were required to be available to all homeowners upon request. I submitted a formal request through the HOA website and was surprised when the records appeared in my email within an hour. Apparently, their property management software was set up for automatic responses, which Deborah probably did not realize worked on weekends. What I saw in those records made my coffee go cold in my cup. The HOA collected approximately $48,000 per year in dues from the 120 homes in the neighborhood. Their legitimate expenses for lawn maintenance of common areas, snow removal, and insurance came to roughly $30,000. That left $18,000 that should have been going into reserves or being used for neighborhood improvements. Instead, over the past 4 years, the HOA had spent nearly $60,000 on legal fees, all of it going to the same law firm, Wellington Legal Services. I did a quick search and found that Wellington Legal Services was owned by Richard Wellington, Deborah's husband. This was a serious problem. Using HOA funds to funnel money to a board member's family business was a massive conflict of interest and potentially illegal. I started digging deeper, cross-referencing the legal expenses with HOA meeting minutes that were posted online. Almost every legal fee corresponded to Deborah taking action against a homeowner for some minor violation. My phone rang again, and this time it was Susan Chen from 3 houses down. "Carter, I heard about what happened this morning," she said. "I wanted to warn you that Deborah does not back down. She will make your life miserable if you fight her on this. Susan, I need to ask you something. When Deborah reported you about the grill, did the HOA hire a lawyer to send you letters?" There was a pause. "Yes, we got 3 certified letters from some law firm threatening legal action if we did not remove it. The letters alone probably cost more than the grill was worth. We just got rid of it to make the whole thing go away. And you had to pay fines, $500 total." It was ridiculous, but what could we do? I thanked her and hung up, feeling my anger growing. This was not just about petty HOA nonsense anymore. This was about someone abusing their position for financial gain and using intimidation to silence anyone who questioned them. Monday morning, I went to town hall for our regular council meeting. As council president, I had to arrive early to review the agenda with our town manager and make sure everything was in order. Fairbanks was not a huge city, with a population of around 32,000. But we had our share of complex issues to deal with, ranging from infrastructure maintenance in extreme weather to balancing the needs of military families from nearby Fort Wainwright with longtime residents. The meeting went smoothly, and we managed to approve funding for new traffic signals on Airport Way, which would make Martinez's wife happy at least. Afterwards, I stayed behind to talk with Sandra Ramos, who served as our town attorney in addition to her private practice. "Sandra, I need some advice about HOA law," I said, settling into one of the chairs in her office. She raised an eyebrow. "Let me guess. Pinewood Estates? You know about them, Carter. Everyone who deals with municipal law in this town knows about Deborah Wellington. She is constantly filing complaints with the town about code violations, demanding that we take action against her neighbors. Half the time, the things she reports are not even actual violations, just things she personally dislikes." I explained what I had found in the financial records and my suspicion about the conflict of interest. Sandra's expression grew more serious as I talked. "If what you are saying is accurate, that is a major problem," she said. "In Alaska, HOA board members have a fiduciary duty to act in the best interests of the association, not their personal interests. Funneling money to a family business without disclosure and board approval could be considered embezzlement or fraud. What would it take to investigate this properly? You would need to gather documentation, potentially hire a forensic accountant to review the records, and present the evidence to the HOA membership. If there is enough support, the membership can call for a special meeting to remove board members. If there is evidence of criminal activity, it would need to be reported to the police and potentially the district attorney. And in the meantime," Sandra smiled slightly, "in the meantime, you are under no legal obligation to pay fines for violations that are not clearly defined in the bylaws, or for rules that are not being enforced consistently across the neighborhood. If they try to put a lien on your property, you can challenge it in court, and based on what you have told me, you would probably win." I left her office feeling more confident about my course of action. That confidence lasted until I got home and found a certified letter taped to my front door. Inside was a formal notice of violation, exactly as Deborah had promised, along with a fine schedule that would cost me $100 per day starting immediately. What caught my attention was not the fine, but the letterhead. The notice was on official Wellington Legal Services stationery and was signed by Richard Wellington as legal counsel for the Pinewood Estates HOA. The letter threatened immediate legal action if I did not comply within 48 hours, including placing a lien on my property and potentially forcing a sale to recover unpaid fines. This was intimidation, pure and simple. I took photos of everything and sent them to Sandra, then called Paul Henderson. "Paul, I need you to do me a favor. Can you ask around the neighborhood and find out how many other people have received letters from Wellington Legal Services regarding HOA violations? I can tell you right now it is probably at least 30 or 40 households. Why? Because I think Deborah has been using her position to create business for her husband's law firm, and that is illegal. I need documentation, though. If people are willing to share their letters and records of fines they have paid, I can build a case to remove her from the board and potentially get their money back." "Are you serious?" Paul's voice was filled with cautious hope. "People would love that, but Carter, she will come after you hard. She has ruined people's lives over less. Let her try. I have dealt with tougher opponents than a small-time HOA tyrant." Over the next 3 days, my email and mailbox filled up with documentation from neighbors. It was even worse than I had initially thought. Deborah had found violations on nearly every property in the neighborhood at some point, ranging from grass being a quarter-inch too long to holiday decorations being left up one day past the approved date. Each violation resulted in multiple certified letters from her husband's law firm, each letter generating billable hours. The Richardsons, who Paul had mentioned being forced to sell their house, had paid over $2,000 in fines and legal fees before the HOA placed a lien on their property. Their crime had been painting their front door a shade of blue that Deborah claimed was not on the approved color list, even though 3 other houses in the neighborhood had similar colors that went unchallenged. I compiled everything into a comprehensive report and sent it to Sandra for review. Her response came back within a day. This was definitely enough to warrant further investigation, and she believed there were grounds for both civil action and potential criminal charges. On Thursday evening, I received a phone call from an unknown number. When I answered, a man's voice greeted me with barely concealed hostility. "Mr. Lawson, this is Richard Wellington. I am calling regarding your continued violation of Pinewood Estates HOA bylaws. As of today, you owe $400 in fines, and that number will continue to grow until you comply. Mr. Wellington, I am aware of the alleged violations. I am not paying any fines because I do not believe the bylaws are being interpreted or enforced correctly. That is not your decision to make. The HOA board has full authority to interpret and enforce the bylaws as they see fit. If you do not pay the outstanding fines and remove the vehicle by tomorrow, we will begin the process of filing a lien against your property." His tone was condescending, like he was talking to a child who did not understand how the world worked. It reminded me of certain developers I had dealt with on the town council, who thought they could bully their way through the approval process. "Mr. Wellington, I am curious about something. How much does your firm charge the HOA for sending these violation letters?" There was a pause. "That is confidential attorney-client information. Actually, HOA financial records are available to all homeowners. I have been reviewing them quite carefully." It seems your firm has received approximately $60,000 from the HOA over the past 4 years, which is a significant portion of homeowner dues. That strikes me as a potential conflict of interest, given that your wife is the HOA president. The silence on the other end of the line stretched out for several seconds. When Richard finally spoke, his voice was tight. There is no conflict of interest. The board approved all legal expenses, a board that your wife controls through her voting bloc. I am also curious why so many homeowners receive multiple letters for single violations, each one generating additional legal fees. It almost looks like the violations are being created to justify ongoing legal expenses. You need to be very careful about making accusations you cannot prove, Mr. Lawson. Defamation is a serious matter. So is embezzlement and fraud. I am not making accusations, Mr. Wellington. I am simply noting some interesting patterns in the public records. I plan to present my findings at the next HOA meeting and let the membership decide if they want to continue funding these legal expenses. Richard's voice dropped to a threatening rumble. You are making a big mistake. We have dealt with troublemakers before, and we know how to handle them. You will regret this. Is that a threat? It is a fact. Good evening, Mr. Lawson. He hung up, and I sat there holding my phone, feeling my heart rate slowly return to normal. The direct threat was actually helpful in a way, because it showed how seriously they took the challenge to their scheme. People who were operating legitimately did not usually respond with intimidation. I immediately called Sandra and told her about the conversation. She advised me to document everything and consider filing a police report if I received any more direct threats. She also suggested moving up the timeline on presenting the evidence to the HOA membership. The next morning, I woke up to find my snow machine tipped over on its side in the driveway, with a long scratch down the side panel. The fuel cap had been removed, and someone had poured something into the tank that smelled like sugar water. The machine was effectively ruined, with potential damage to the engine that would cost thousands to repair. I took extensive photos and called the police. This time, it was not Martinez who responded, but a younger officer named Torres. She walked around the snow machine, taking her own photos and making notes. "You have any idea who might have done this?" she asked. "I have a strong suspicion, but no proof. I have been having an ongoing dispute with the HOA president, and her husband threatened me last night." I showed her the documentation of fines and played the recording I had made of Richard's phone call, which was legal in Alaska as a one-party consent state. Torres's expression hardened as she listened. "This sounds like it is escalating beyond a simple neighborhood dispute. I am going to file a report for criminal mischief and possibly intimidation. Do you have any security cameras?" "Not yet, but I am installing them today." "Good idea. In the meantime, I would recommend parking any other vehicles in your garage if possible, and be aware of your surroundings. If this is related to the HOA issue, they might try other tactics to harass you." After Torres left, I called my insurance company and then spent 2 hours installing a comprehensive security camera system that covered my entire property. The cost was significant, but I had a feeling I was going to need the evidence. The regular monthly HOA meeting was scheduled for the following Tuesday evening at 7. Normally, these meetings drew maybe 10 or 15 homeowners, most of whom were either on Deborah's side or too intimidated to speak up. This time, I made sure word got out about what I had found and encouraged people to attend. When I arrived at the community clubhouse at 6:45, the parking lot was already nearly full. I did a quick count and estimated at least 60 people were there, which was an unprecedented turnout. Paul Henderson found me near the entrance. "Looks like people are ready for a change," he said. "I have been spreading the word about what you found. People are angry, Carter, really angry." Inside, the meeting room was set up with rows of folding chairs facing a table where Deborah sat with her two board allies, Margaret Foster and Linda Crane. Richard Wellington sat off to one side, looking like he wished he were anywhere else. When Deborah saw the crowd filing in, her face went pale, but she quickly composed herself. "This is a very impressive turnout," she said, her voice carrying across the room. "I hope everyone is here to participate constructively in our community governance." I took a seat in the third row and waited. Deborah called the meeting to order and started going through the standard agenda items, approving minutes from the previous meeting and discussing upcoming landscape maintenance. Several times, people tried to interrupt with questions about finances, but she shut them down, insisting they wait for the appropriate agenda item. Finally, after nearly 45 minutes of procedural minutiae, we reached the open forum section where homeowners could raise concerns. I stood up, holding a folder with all my documentation. "Madam President, I would like to address some serious concerns about HOA financial management. Please state your name and address for the record," Deborah said, her voice icy. "Carter Lawson, 847 Spruce Street." I have been reviewing the HOA financial records, as is my right as a homeowner, and I have discovered some troubling patterns. The finances are regularly audited and approved by the board, Margaret Foster interrupted. "There is nothing troubling about them." "When was the last independent audit conducted?" I asked. The three women looked at each other. Linda Crane finally spoke up. "We review the finances quarterly. That serves as our audit process. With all due respect, board members reviewing their own spending is not an audit. What I have found is that over the past 4 years, this HOA has spent approximately $60,000 on legal fees, all paid to Wellington Legal Services, which is owned by our board president's husband. That represents nearly a third of all dues collected during that period." The room erupted in shocked murmurs. Deborah banged her gavel on the table. "Order, Mr. Lawson, you are out of line. Legal expenses are a necessary part of enforcing our community standards." "I am not disputing that some legal expenses are necessary," I continued. "What I am questioning is why we need to spend an average of $15,000 per year on legal fees for a neighborhood of 120 homes. I have documentation here showing that homeowners have been fined for incredibly minor infractions, and each fine generates multiple letters from Wellington Legal Services at what I assume are billable hours." I held up copies of some of the letters I had collected. The Richardsons received 5 separate letters about the color of their front door. The Chens received 4 letters about a patio grill. Each letter probably cost the HOA at least $200 in legal fees, which means we collectively paid over $1,000 to harass the Chens about a grill that was not even visible from the street. "Those were legitimate code violations," Deborah snapped. "Just because you do not like the rules does not mean they can be ignored." "Were they legitimate, though? Because I have also found that these rules are not being enforced consistently. The Mitchells have a grill on their back patio that has never been cited. The Hendersons have a front door that is a non-approved color, but they have never received a violation notice. It seems like the enforcement is selective, targeting people who might push back while ignoring others." Paul Henderson stood up. "I want to know why we are spending so much money on legal fees when our community playground equipment has not been updated in 8 years, and we have been asking for speed bumps for 3 years. Where are our priorities?" Other homeowners started standing and voicing their own concerns and complaints. The meeting descended into chaos with Deborah banging her gavel repeatedly and demanding order. Richard Wellington stood up and tried to leave, but Susan Chen blocked his path. "I want to know how much you personally have made off this HOA," she demanded. "Because from where I am standing, it looks like you and your wife have been using our dues as a personal piggy bank." "That is slander," Richard shouted. "I will sue you for defamation." "Truth is an absolute defense to defamation," I said loudly enough to be heard over the commotion. "And I have documentation to back up everything I have said here tonight. In fact, I have sent all of this information to the town attorney for review, and she believes there may be grounds for criminal charges related to conflict of interest and misuse of HOA funds." That got everyone's attention. The room went silent. Deborah was standing now, her face flushed red. "You have no authority to involve outside agencies in HOA business. This is a private organization. Actually, HOAs in Alaska are subject to state law regarding nonprofit organizations and fiduciary duty. When board members use their positions for personal financial gain, that becomes a legal matter, not just an internal HOA issue." I turned to address the room at large. "I am calling for a vote of no confidence in the current board, and a motion to have an independent forensic audit conducted of all HOA finances for the past 5 years. If the audit reveals financial impropriety, I am also calling for the HOA to pursue legal action to recover any misappropriated funds." "I second that motion," Paul called out. "And I third it," Susan added. Deborah tried to regain control. "That is not how parliamentary procedure works. You cannot just call for votes on motions that are not on the agenda." According to the HOA bylaws, Section 27, any homeowner can make a motion during open forum, and if it receives support from at least 10% of the membership, it must be put to a vote, I said, having memorized the relevant sections. "We have well over 10% of the membership here tonight. Who do you think you are?" Deborah demanded, her composure finally cracking. "You move into this neighborhood and immediately start causing trouble, refusing to follow the rules, making wild accusations. I have worked for 4 years to maintain the standards of this community, and I will not let some arrogant newcomer destroy everything I have built. I think," I said calmly, "that I am someone who does not appreciate being bullied or watching my neighbors be taken advantage of. I am also the town council president, which means I have some experience with governance and financial oversight. What you have been doing here would never be tolerated in any legitimate public organization, and it should not be tolerated in an HOA either." The revelation of my position sent another wave of murmuring through the crowd. Deborah's face went from red to white. "You are on the town council." "I am the council president, actually," which is how I knew to look at the financial records and how I know what constitutes a conflict of interest. "It is also how I know that the threats your husband made against me, both verbal and through the vandalism of my property, could result in criminal charges if he does not back off." Richard Wellington pushed past Susan and headed for the door. "I am not listening to any more of this nonsense." "Deborah, we are leaving." "No," Linda Crane said suddenly. "I want to hear more about these financial concerns. I approved those legal expenses because Deborah said they were necessary, but I never really looked at the details. If we have been paying her husband's firm excessive fees, I want to know about it." Margaret Foster nodded slowly. "I think we need to take Mr. Lawson's motion seriously. If there is nothing wrong with the finances, an audit will show that. If there are problems, we need to address them." Deborah looked betrayed. "You are both turning on me, After everything I have done for this neighborhood, you called the police on my grandson for skateboarding, Margaret said quietly. He was 8 years old, Deborah. That was when I started wondering if maybe you had gone too far. The vote was called, and it was overwhelming. Out of 68 homeowners present, 62 voted in favor of removing the current board and authorizing an independent audit. Only Deborah, Richard, and 4 of their close friends voted against it. A temporary board was appointed on the spot, with Paul Henderson as interim president, and they immediately voted to suspend all enforcement actions pending the audit results. They also voted to hire an attorney who was not Richard Wellington to represent the HOA's interests going forward. Deborah gathered her papers with shaking hands and stormed out of the meeting, Richard following behind her. As they left, she turned and pointed at me. "This is not over. You have no idea what you have started." The following weeks were a whirlwind of activity. The forensic accountant we hired found exactly what I had suspected. Systematic overbilling by Wellington Legal Services, with fees that were 2 to 3 times the normal rate for similar work. More damaging was the discovery that Deborah had been creating violations specifically to generate legal work, sometimes citing homeowners for issues that did not actually violate any bylaw. The accountant estimated that the HOA had been overcharged by approximately $45,000 over 4 years, and that was conservative. The report was turned over to the Fairbanks Police Department, who opened a formal investigation into potential fraud and embezzlement. Detective Sarah Morrison, who was assigned to the case, interviewed dozens of homeowners and reviewed all the documentation. She also discovered that Deborah and Richard had used similar tactics in another HOA in Anchorage before moving to Fairbanks, though that case had been settled quietly with them agreeing to resign from the board in exchange for no criminal charges. "We have enough for charges this time," Morrison told me during one of our conversations. "The district attorney is preparing cases for theft by deception and abuse of position. Mrs. Wellington used her authority as board president to funnel money to her husband's business under false pretenses. That is textbook fraud." The arrests came on a Tuesday morning. I was at town hall when I got the text from Paul Henderson. "Police just took Deborah and Richard out of their house in handcuffs. It is really happening." The local news picked up the story that evening, and by the next day it had spread to Anchorage media outlets. "HOA president arrested for fraud" was not a headline you saw every day, especially not in Alaska where HOA scandals were less common than in places like Arizona or Florida. The legal process moved forward steadily. The district attorney was particularly interested in the case because HOA fraud was an emerging issue that affected many communities, and he wanted to send a message that this behavior would not be tolerated. Deborah and Richard initially tried to fight the charges, claiming that everything they had done was within their authority as board members and legal counsel. Their defense fell apart when the accountant testified about the overbilling, and when dozens of homeowners came forward to describe the harassment and intimidation they had endured. The Richardsons were particularly effective witnesses, describing how they had been forced to sell their home at a loss because of the lien Deborah had placed on their property over a paint color dispute. In the end, both Deborah and Richard accepted plea deals. Deborah pleaded guilty to theft by deception and abuse of position, receiving a sentence of 18 months in prison followed by 3 years of probation. She was also ordered to pay full restitution to the HOA in the amount of $52,000, which represented the overbilling plus interest and legal costs. Richard pleaded guilty to fraud and conspiracy, receiving 2 years in prison and permanent disbarment from practicing law in Alaska. His law firm was dissolved, and all his assets were seized to help pay the restitution. The Pinewood Estates HOA, under its new leadership, used the restitution money to make long overdue improvements to the neighborhood. We installed new playground equipment, added speed bumps on the main residential streets, and even built a small dog park that had been requested for years, but never funded under Deborah's tenure. The bylaws were also revised to add more specific guidelines about board member conflicts of interest and to require annual independent audits. We also changed the enforcement procedures to require warnings before fines and to have a neutral appeals process for homeowners who disagreed with citations. As for my snow machine, my insurance covered most of the damage, and I had it repaired and properly stored in my garage once I finally finished unpacking all those boxes. I also kept the security camera system active, though thankfully there were no more incidents of vandalism. The whole experience taught me something valuable about the importance of standing up to bullies, even when it would be easier to just go along. If I had simply moved the snow machine and paid the fines like so many others had done before me, Deborah and Richard would have continued their scheme indefinitely, potentially costing the neighborhood hundreds of thousands of dollars over the years. At the next town council meeting, several of my colleagues commented on the HOA case and asked if there was anything the town could do to prevent similar situations. I worked with Sandra Ramos to draft an ordinance requiring all HOAs within town limits to file annual financial reports with the town clerk and to make those reports easily accessible to homeowners. It was not a perfect solution, but it added another layer of oversight that could help catch problems early. One evening, about 6 months after the arrests, I was sitting on my back deck enjoying the long summer twilight that Alaska is famous for when Paul Henderson came over with a 6-pack of beer. "Thought you might want to celebrate," he said, handing me a bottle. "The Richardsons are moving back to the neighborhood. They found a house 3 streets over, and they are getting a good deal on it because the market has softened a bit." "That is great news," I said, genuinely pleased. "They deserve to come home after being driven out like that." They are not the only ones. Susan Chen said that 4 other families who moved away because of Deborah have been asking about properties for sale here. Word has gotten out that Pinewood Estates is a good place to live again now that the tyrant is gone. We sat in comfortable silence for a while, listening to the birds and watching the sky slowly shift through shades of gold and pink. Finally, Paul spoke again. "You know, when you first moved here, I thought you were going to be just another person who kept their head down and tried not to make waves. I am glad I was wrong. I spent too many years in public service to watch someone abuse their power like that and not do something about it," I said. "The whole point of HOAs is supposed to be helping maintain property values and creating a pleasant community. What Deborah was doing was the exact opposite. Well, you definitely made an impact. Property values have actually gone up in the past few months now that people are not terrified of getting fined for every little thing. The real estate agents are marketing Pinewood Estates as a neighborhood with responsible governance, which is apparently a selling point." The summer passed peacefully, and then fall arrived with its spectacular display of gold and red leaves. Winter came early that year, with the first significant snowfall arriving in late October. I took my snow machine out on the trails nearly every weekend, enjoying the pristine wilderness that was one of the main reasons I had moved to Alaska in the first place. The HOA continued to function smoothly under Paul's leadership, and when elections were held in the spring, A diverse group of homeowners was elected to the board. The new board members were committed to transparency and actually serving the community rather than using their positions for personal gain. I continued my work on the town council, dealing with the usual array of zoning disputes, budget allocations, and infrastructure projects. The experience with the HOA had actually given me some useful insights into how small-scale governance could go wrong, and I made sure to apply those lessons to the larger arena of town government. One of my priorities became ensuring that town boards and commissions had proper oversight, and that conflicts of interest were taken seriously. I worked with the town manager to implement more rigorous financial controls and to create easier ways for citizens to report concerns about potential corruption or abuse of power. The media attention from the HOA case had an unexpected benefit. It raised awareness about my work on the town council and the issues I cared about. My approval ratings went up significantly, and people seemed to appreciate having a council president who was willing to take on difficult situations rather than avoiding conflict. There was talk of me potentially running for mayor in the next election cycle, though I had not made any decisions about that yet. For now, I was content to focus on the work at hand and to enjoy the life I had built in this beautiful, challenging, and occasionally frustrating place. Looking back on the whole situation with Deborah and the HOA, I realized that it had been a defining moment in my tenure as council president. It had shown people that I was willing to fight for what was right, even when it affected me personally, and that I understood the concerns of regular homeowners who just wanted to live their lives without unnecessary harassment. It had also reinforced my belief that power without accountability inevitably leads to abuse. Whether it was a small HOA board or a large government body, the same principles applied: transparency, fairness, and a genuine commitment to serving the people rather than yourself. The Snowmachine incident that had started the whole thing seemed almost trivial in retrospect, but it had been the spark that exposed a much larger problem. If Deborah had not made the mistake of targeting someone who actually understood governance and had the resources to fight back, she might have continued her scheme for many more years. I made a point of sharing the story whenever I spoke to community groups or at town hall meetings. Not to brag about my role in it, but to encourage other people to speak up when they saw something wrong. Too often, people stayed silent because they felt powerless or feared retaliation. The HOA situation had shown that even someone in a position of seemingly unchallenged authority could be held accountable if enough people were willing to stand together. The final piece of the story came almost a year after the arrests. I received a letter from the Alaska Department of Law informing me that the restitution payments were complete and that the case was officially closed. Deborah and Richard had liquidated most of their assets to pay what they owed, and the remainder was being garnished from whatever income they managed to earn after prison. That same week, I ran into Officer Martinez at a coffee shop downtown. He grinned when he saw me. "Still remember that morning I showed up about your snow machine," he said. "Thought it was just another nuisance call from Mrs. Wellington. Had no idea it was going to turn into the biggest fraud case the department had seen in 5 years." "Neither did I admitted. "I just wanted to park my snow machine in my driveway without getting harassed." "Well, you did a lot more than that. Chief Ramos says complaint calls from Pinewood Estates have dropped by about 90% since you cleaned house, made all our lives easier." As I drove home that afternoon, passing through the familiar streets of Fairbanks, I felt a deep sense of satisfaction. Not because I had taken down someone who had wronged me, though there was admittedly some satisfaction in that, but because I had helped create positive change for an entire community. The houses of Pinewood Estates looked the same as they always had, with their neat yards and tidy driveways. But there was a different feeling now, a sense that this was a place where people could actually enjoy their homes without fear. Kids played in the streets without worrying about being reported for minor infractions. People decorated for holidays with enthusiasm rather than anxiety about getting fined. My own house was truly starting to feel like home. The garage was finally organized, the boxes all unpacked, and the snow machine sat ready for the next adventure. The security cameras were still active, but more out of general precaution than any real concern about targeted harassment. That evening, I attended a neighborhood barbecue that the HOA had organized as a community building event. It was well attended, with families spread out across the common area, kids running around playing tag, and adults standing in groups chatting and laughing. This was what an HOA was supposed to facilitate: community, not conflict. Susan Chen approached me with a plate of food. "I wanted to thank you again for everything you did," she said. "My husband and I were seriously considering moving because we could not deal with Deborah anymore. This neighborhood actually feels like a community now. You are welcome, but it was not just me. Everyone who came to that meeting and voted for change deserves credit. I just helped organize the information. Still, it took courage to stand up to her the way you did. A lot of people were afraid. I understood that fear." Deborah had cultivated an atmosphere of intimidation, where people felt powerless to challenge her authority. Breaking through that fear required someone who had both the knowledge to identify what was wrong and the confidence to confront it publicly. I had been fortunate to have both. As the sun began to set, casting long shadows across the park, I looked around at the gathering and felt a profound sense of contentment. This was what public service was supposed to achieve, making people's lives better in concrete, meaningful ways. Whether it was fixing traffic patterns on Airport Way or stopping HOA fraud in Pinewood Estates, the goal was always the same: creating a community where people could thrive. The story of how an HOA Karen called the cops on my snow machine and had no idea I was the town council president would probably be told and retold in Fairbanks for years to come. It had already taken on a somewhat legendary quality, with some details getting exaggerated in the retelling. But the core truth remained. Abuse of power could be challenged and defeated, even when it seemed firmly entrenched. As I said goodbye to my neighbors and walked back to my house that night, I thought about all the twists and turns that had led to this moment. A simple snow machine purchase, a vindictive HOA president, a chance discovery of financial records, and a willingness to fight back against injustice. Any one of those elements could have been different, and the outcome would have been different too. But things had unfolded the way they had, and an entire neighborhood was better for it. That was worth celebrating, worth remembering, and worth sharing with others who might find themselves in similar situations. Because at the end of the day, that is what community really means. People looking out for each other, standing up for what is right, and refusing to let bullies have the final word. The lights in my house were warm and welcoming as I stepped inside, leaving the cool Alaska evening behind. Tomorrow would bring new challenges on the town council, new issues to address, new problems to solve. But tonight, I could rest knowing that I had made a real difference in my own neighborhood, and that was something to be proud of. The snow machine that had started it all sat safely in my garage, ready for the next winter adventure. And this time, nobody was going to call the cops about it.